scripture reading this morning as we continue our series, Faith Without Fear, is from Genesis chapter 5, page 4 in the Bible. Genesis chapter 5, beginning in verse 18. And you might think having a scripture reading from the genealogy is boring. This is not. So we start with Jared, who lived 162 years and begot Enoch. After he begot Enoch, Jared lived 800 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. Enoch lived 65 years and begot Methuselah. After he begot Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Let's pray. Father, work in our hearts this morning as we look to you together. Teach us, lift us, guide us. Help us to understand a little more of Jesus. We ask in his name. Amen. We've talked about and are going to talk about some heroes of the faith. And you know about Daniel defeating the lions. That was Bible school. You know about David defeating the giant. You know about Gideon defeating a 135,000-man army. But the first one listed, with all that excitement going on, the first one listed in the Hall of Fame of Faith, Hebrews 11, the first one listed, the very first one, who starts it all off talking about faith, is Enoch. You know what he did? You know what amazing things he did? You know what amazing enemies he faced? You know what amazing giants and evil he faced? None. He faced the most difficult enemy of all time. That's all he did. He faced the most difficult enemy of all time, one we still face today, and he defeated it. And that enemy is death. You see, you can see lions and stop them. You can fight a giant because you can see him. Gideon certainly didn't have any problem seeing 145,000 men. But how do you defeat death? Enoch did it. One of the few people in the whole Bible who did not die. And just so you'll know, this is not a sales pitch for take this pill and you won't die. We're not talking about that, but there's lots of stuff that we can learn from Enoch that can help us in our lives. In chapter 11 of Hebrews it says, Enoch had this testimony, that he pleased God. And in chapter 5 of Genesis, we see that he simply walked with God. No battles, no stress. He walked with God. And you see, that's not exciting at all. I was trying to think of exciting things that I could do or noises that I could make that would keep you all excited because this is going for a walk. Well, he didn't come back. That's exciting. says here, Enoch walked with God 300 years. Now that, baby, is a long walk. The thing that we learn from Enoch, and makes a difference in our lives, is that Enoch's priority in his life was his relationship with God. If I can stop right there, that's the point. That's awesome. And if the priority in your life is your relationship with God, you can share with him and share blessing and share abundant life with him as well as Enoch did. But I worked on the sermon all week, so I gotta give you a little more. First of all, the setting that Enoch was in. You know, the worst period in history, the worst time ever in history, is the one you're living in. That's the way it's always been. It's always been worse in your lifetime. But I'll tell you something, you'd have a hard time beating Enoch's lifetime. Because Enoch was near the end of the period of time before the flood. Near the end of the period of time in which the world is going down the drain so fast, God says, I have to clean up the whole thing. In chapter 6, the description of what the condition of the world was that everybody thought wicked thoughts all the time. Think about that. Everybody thought wicked thoughts all the time. Said their minds were corrupt and the world was full of violence. And in the middle of this, in the middle of that, without, as far as I can see, any kind of support group or church or anything that he was involved with, in the middle of a world that was literally going to hell in a handbasket, Enoch walked with God 300 years. Talk about peer pressure. If it wasn't bad enough to live in that kind of world, to be exposed to that kind of world day by day, think about being exposed to, you do what I say or I'll kill you. Violence was the answer, was the key of that time. How did Enoch deal with that kind of peer pressure? And you see the application to us? We have peer pressure. But Enoch walked with God. His priority in his life was his relationship with God. I was trying to think of an example that we could all relate to of somebody who has done this in our lifetime. The only one I could think of was my son Jesse. Some of you knew him, some of you didn't. But he had the same priority as Enoch. His relationship with God was the most important thing in his life. Now, he was a good kid, too. The thing that was interesting about Jesse was that everybody that I have ever talked to that knew him, everybody that I ever talked to that knew him said he was my best friend. And I have to say, no, he wasn't. He was my best friend. But Jesse had as a teenager, had a bunch of teenage boys who were into teenage boy things that he did stuff with. And he really enjoyed golfing and bowling and hunting with them. But when it came down to, I think the technical term is sowing your wild oats. And they would say, come on, just come on, come on. And he would say, you guys, and turn away.